Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Here to talk all things hockey are your hosts, Brad Crisco, Ryan Hanna, and Evan Lobsinger.
Well, we wanted playoff hockey.
You got it.
Big monkey paw finger curling moment. One of the best regular season goaltending performances I've seen in a long time. Says something for the Red Wings that they are now privy to that, because usually it's like, backup goalie makes 35 saves, not, Andrei Vasilevskiy. First one off the ice in warm-ups and you're chuckling because all of a sudden the Red Wings are seeing starters again, but then he puts up a near 50 save shutout. You could see that coming from a mile away.
Yeah, there were a lot of posts about that on social media throughout the day, because not only was Detroit not getting Tampa's backup like they usually do, Tampa's on a back-to-back, so it was very much a situation where they would have been in the realm of playing the backup against the Red Wings. And I forget who Tampa was playing today, but it was another team in the playoff race, and they chose to play Vasilevskiy against the Red Wings, and everybody's like, wow, what a great sign. The Red Wings are the team that good teams legitimately respect and possibly fear a little bit now. And like you said, Ryan, monkey paw curls.
You know what? It's not like it's unfortunate for the Red Wings, and we'll talk about the game that they played, but this is what it's like. This is what it's like to be playing with the big boys. You want to play big boy hockey? You're going to have to face the best goalie on the planet. And you know what was funny, actually, in the middle of all of this happening, the most likely goaltender that the Red Wings would have to face if they did end up doing the thing and making the playoffs scored a goal last night. Ullmark scored for Boston. And I was like, there's a kind of like hockey gods chuckling and poking fun at Red Wings fans moment when they can't score on an elite tier goalie, and the elite tier goalie that might be their problem in a couple months is actually scoring. Hockey's fun. It's been a fun week. Anyhow, the Red Wings have played a couple games. We are getting ever closer to the trade deadline. The playoff picture is, I don't want to say starting to become more clear, but, the teams in it are starting to become a little bit more clear, and there's lots to talk about. So here to talk to you about all things Detroit Red Wings hockey, the world of the NHL, the trade deadline, and lots more. Welcome to the Winged Wheel Podcast. I am one of your hosts, Ryan Hanna.
I'm Brad Crisco.
And I'm Evan.
On this episode of the podcast, we'll be reviewing the two games that the Detroit Red Wings have played, one against the Rangers and one against the Lightning. We'll be talking about the storylines out of that game, Ville Husso, Filip Zadina, Michael Rasmussen, Dylan Larkin, etc. We'll talk about the woes of the Tampa Bay game. Despite how great the Red Wings played, they didn't walk away with any points there. Updates in terms of Red Wings injuries. Michael Rasmussen was declared out indefinitely today. We have Max Bultman on the show for a quick hit. I caught some of his time while he was in an Uber to get his pre-trade deadline thoughts. We will give our perspective on the approaching trade deadline, whether the Red Wings are poised to be buyers, sellers, neither or both, the current standings, and then as of recording right now, we know Timo Meier has been traded to the Devils. We don't know the return yet, so the NHL is on the clock. They have about 45 minutes to tell us who's been traded so we can cover it. So we'll see, and there have been some other trades and news across the world of the NHL. Before all that, first, there's going to be a lot of folks, I think, who are newer listening to the podcast. So first, welcome. And secondly, I just want to, we're really bad at doing this, advertising ourselves. But if you are listening to the podcast, either new or a returning listener, and you want to support the show, our Patreon is pretty much the heart and soul of everything that we do. This show doesn't, reach the heights that we somehow miraculously reach and grow or run pretty much all year without the support of our patrons. So patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. There's a lot of benefits. You get access to the Winged Wheel Podcast Discord, which is an excellent community. You get access to our Patreon exclusive bonus episodes that we record right after these, where we answer all of the overtime questions, which is the segment at the end of the show that didn't make it to the main show. We let loose. We have fun. The guys are allowed to swear a little bit more, and it's generally a good time. And then also you're entered into all of our giveaways automatically. We're giving away 2 tickets to every Detroit Red Wings home game this season, the vast majority of them going directly to our patrons. So patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. And for our Winged Wheel Podcast night at the LCA, folks who are interested, I believe tickets are currently sold out. We are working on potentially adding more. It's not guaranteed. You just kept selling us out. You've already broken our sales record. So again, that is a partnered event with the Detroit Red Wings where we host a live episode of the Winged Wheel podcast and go to a Red Wings game altogether. The tickets are discounted. You get a special Winged Wheel podcast discount. And most importantly, a portion of the proceeds go directly to the Jamie Daniels Foundation. So DetroitRedWings.com/WWP is where you would get your tickets if we're able to add more. So stay tuned on that. And for those of you who have bought tickets, more details on the day's schedule are coming. Let's jump right into it. The Red Wings, walking away from last episode, were really well poised to make a push and to force Steve Yzerman's hand to come into the trade deadline as, hey, stand pat, don't sell our assets. We want to make a run at this. We said with New York and Tampa Bay, those were two tough teams. Those are playoff caliber teams who are adding. Those are playoff caliber teams who were, high up in the standings, and the Red Wings had to walk away with some points. So let's start with the New York game where the Red Wings dominated.
Not only did they dominate, they were dominating three zones, which, for as good as the Red Wings have been this lately and this season in general, has not been a common theme. Usually they're dominating at least on their good games. I should specify before people bring up some box scores from earlier in the year.
Right.
They were dominating the defensive zone and the neutral zone, and they would not get much going offensively. But dropping 4 on the Rangers isn't a small feat, and they were doing it in a bunch of different ways. Everything's clicking for them in the offensive zone when Filip Zadina has the snipe of the night.
Yes.
It was far side barn in off a turnover that I believe Larkin forced and Zadina finished on, and Andrew Copp started clicking on all cylinders. Guess all he needed to do was play a former team, and that got him going. But yeah, circling back, it was, and this will be a theme with the Tampa game, surprisingly well-rounded for the Red Wings. They always seem to get it done one way or the other when they do win, but not like this.
And when I say dominated, I don't mean they went out there and made New York look like a amateur team. I think towards the second half of the game, New York picked it up and cleaned up their game a little bit and was able to kind of get some offense going in terms of generating chances. But that's when, like you said, Brad, it was an all-around effort. The Red Wings really relied on Ville Husso and a lot of block shots, actually. The amount of lanes that they got into was impressive as well. So all around, a really strong effort. Andrew Copp against his former team had what was described, I think, fairly as one of his best nights of the season. Open scoring for Detroit and assisted the Rasmussen and the Hronek goals. So 3 points for Copp, who this is, in the 2 steps forward, 1 step back kind of nature of Copp's season. This seems to be one of his 2 steps forward games for him. And he looked really good. It's funny, I was talking to Greg Kaplan from Blue Shirts Breakaway, and he was like, I absolutely should have bet on Copp scoring because, of course, he was going to have a revenge game against the Rangers, who chose Trocheck over him. So, like you mentioned, Brad, the scoring was continued after Copp. The Rangers tied it very briefly in the second period, and the scoring was continued by Filip Zadina. Dylan Larkin did really well to take advantage of a turnover, forced a turnover essentially at the blue line, gave it to Filip Zadina, who moved down the wing and fired it home past Halak. That was a confident goal for a guy who sat the game before, where Derek Lalonde acknowledged that tough decision. He had done everything he needed to do since coming back from his broken leg, but it was just because they wanted to fit Vrana in. This was a guy who's largely been affected by confidence historically, who came back, and for him to score that goal in that game after being sat probably unjustifiably in terms of just pure performance, that was really good to see from Filip Zadina.
Yeah, we always joke about being surprised when he does this, but it's what he did in junior. And even in his stint since he's come back from the broken leg, he's playing at a 40-something point pace, about a half a point per game. So maybe the confidence is coming. Pucks are starting to drop. He had another play later in that game that's worth noting where he absolutely walked the Rangers defenseman, and Halak made a good save on the backhand, or else he would have had a highlight reel goal there. It's hard to understate the importance of Filip Zadina becoming something that we expected Filip Zadina to do. Not that he's ever going to be what we projected he was going to be when he was drafted 6th overall. But one of the big keys that has been driving the Red Wings to a lot of their success and a lot of their victories lately is they have finally started to find what most Stanley Cup teams have, which is they can throw their third and fourth lines on the ice and expect a goal every game. Whether it's one line, that line, both lines, multiple goals. The Sundqvist, Zadina, Suter line has been arguably the Red Wings' best line over the past 2-3 weeks. And they score again. They drive play again. And, you know, I know people love to hate on him, and I know he has his apologists, but he's generally the one driving that line. When there's a turnover, a play, a chance, it's either off his stick or he was the last one to touch it before the chance. I made a joke in the Tampa game that, you know, Pius Suter got robbed point blank by Andrei Vasilevskiy. That's how you know Vasilevskiy was in one. The turnover and pass was by Zadina.
Yeah.
And it's becoming a very common thing. So him getting the confidence, that line continuing to produce, you couple that with Andrew Copp now maybe hopefully getting going on the second line, because that's probably been the Red Wings' one area of weakness over this hot stretch, is the second line still isn't what you would want it to be. It's really good developments, because again, to reiterate a point we made last episode, if the Red Wings are making the playoffs, it's because they have to out-depth teams, and Andrew Copp and Filip Zadina could be the catalyst to that.
With Filip Zadina, I think, like you mentioned, Brad, it's really important to qualify any conversation about him with, you know, this isn't holding him to his draft stock. But this, in my mind, is almost a perfect analog to the Michael Rasmussen storyline, which is remove expectations from his draft time, and just see what you can make of him now. And there's no guarantee that that's going to be a long-term mainstay on the team, but you want to make it into a valuable asset one way or the other. Michael Rasmussen, and it's kind of a somber topic considering he's injured now, but he's really, over the past couple seasons, cemented his spot in the Red Wings, you know, call it middle six or bottom six, as a valuable impact player. Filip Zadina, if you can build that confidence to have that kind of player playing in your middle six or bottom six, yeah, the production's not always going to be there. If it was, we'd be having a different conversation right now. But you can make meaningful impacts on the ice and then rely and not have to rely on the production to come so much. I actually also think that's going to create a little bit of a positive feedback loop for him, because the moment the pressure is off him, he doesn't have to be the trigger guy in the top six, and Filip Zadina is probably going to be able to do a little bit more. So this, I hope, is the beginning of a Michael Rasmussen-esque development path for him.
Only time will tell at this point.
So the Red Wings ended up winning the game 4-1. The other goals came from Rasmussen, who positioned himself well in front on a play that Perron found him on, I believe. Copp also factored in on that one. And Filip Hronek had a seeing eye shot from the point, again, also from Copp and Kubalik. That was on the power play. And it was, all in all, a really great night for Detroit. Ville Husso made 30 saves. Excellent night for Husso. I tweeted something out. You know, Ville Husso has just been so excellent since returning from the All-Star break. He's had very few, I'd say, bad games, even statistically. The New York game and the Seattle games were the only ones below 900 in terms of a save percentage. Other than that, he's been really, really solid. The Red Wings' success, you know, we talk about their games not being perfect and not exactly the most flashy, and on paper, maybe they weren't the most talented team. You don't get to have those kinds of wins without a goalie doing what Ville Husso is doing. So is he playing, you know, best goalie in the league up there with Vasilevskiy, Ullmark, whoever's going to win the Vezina this year? Those numbers? No, but he's doing way more than the Red Wings would have had in previous years, I think. Them being in the mix now is on the shoulders of Husso and Larkin, and I would even say a little bit more so Husso, because that's a Jenga piece that you can't pull out and have the tower stay up, in my mind.
Yeah, Husso obviously is the most important piece down the stretch here, because as much as we've talked about how the Red Wings have cleaned things up defensively, this is still a relatively inexperienced team, whichever way you want to look at it, from a playoff aspect or from a plain and simple age aspect. There's going to be mistakes. The Tampa game we'll talk about, but you have those scenarios where you're dominating a team, but Seider loses a battle on a pinch, Sundqvist makes a bad read in the neutral zone, and Braden points in on a breakaway.
Yeah.
Those moments are going to happen every game, and they're going to happen multiple times. That just comes with the nature of being an up-and-coming young team.
Braden Point's finish was so clinical on that. I watched that. I'm like, man, that's a team that went to the Cup finals 3 straight times.
It's the McDavid special. That move, when executed properly, is extremely difficult, but extremely successful more often than not. So the Rangers game was a great example of, they had a lot of really good chances relative to the score, and Husso kept them in it. And, the big thing I would say, the difference between Husso and previous years, even when Delkovich or Bernier were running hot, the bad games aren't disastrous.
No.
You know what I mean? Like,
he's not too much below average.
Yeah, when Husso has a bad game, by his standard, it's 3 or 4 goals against, maybe 5. And you can win 5-4, 4-3 games in the NHL. So even if Husso's having an off night, he's at least on enough to give them a chance. Now, with the offense the Red Wings have, more often than not, that's still going to be a loss. But, you look at the Pittsburgh game or whatever, you can win those games. So to me, that is the biggest difference, not only from hey, you need a save to win, but for the confidence of the team playing in front of him. Because if he gives up 3 in the first half of the game, you don't get the feeling from the roster watching the team play in front of him that they think this is coming off the rails. They stick to their game. They don't change a thing. They don't start caving 5 guys and abandoning the offense because they know every shot's going in. So, when you can walk out every night, every game, play 60 minutes the same way and not have to worry about it, it really does change a season.
Yep. And when Brad mentioned, Husso's off nights, something that I've noticed and a lot of people have, the telltale sign of a off night for Husso, which isn't terribly often, but it's just that the rebound control's not there. The pucks are bouncing right off him. They're being coughed up in the dangerous area. It's not so bad recently, but in that stretch of hockey where he was just, I think, worn down, that's when you notice an off Husso, but obviously that's something he's actively working on. So after the Rangers game, the Red Wings were concertedly, not even just by points percentage, in a playoff spot. It was really exciting to see. It was like, that's like the fruit of the Red Wings' labor. They're in it. That's something that they deserved, and it's no longer, if they win their games in hand or 2 points. Like, no, they are in now with games in hand. It was short-lived because it was Buffalo, Washington, I think, played each other. And no matter what the result of that would have been, or Buffalo, Florida or something, no matter what the result of that intra wildcard team game would have been, Detroit would have been bumped out of that playoff spot just by points. But still, seeing them up in there, seeing them in the wildcard spot, that means something. That's something that not just the fans are excitedly paying attention to. That's something that the team is paying attention to. No doubt that was up on the bulletin board in the dressing room. No doubt that's something that Yzerman and Horkoff and Draper and everyone were looking at. That's important to see that kind of thing. So short-lived, yes, but it just kind of cemented that the Red Wings were in the mix. Now, there was kind of an air of, all right, the Red Wings just won all of these games. They even took one off New York. They are now playing the Tampa Bay Lightning, who are going to be in a divisional seed. Andrei Vasilevskiy starting. Can they do this? What kind of game are they going to come out and play? Are they going to get pummeled? Kind of a funny night, because we'll talk about Andrei Vasilevskiy in a second, but you remove him from the equation. The Red Wings were the better team last night.
You said, when you were talking about the Rangers game, you said, yeah, the Red Wings dominated that game, but it's not like they made the Rangers look like a peewee team or anything like that. At points in the Tampa game, they made Tampa look like a peewee team. There was prolonged stretches where it felt like Tampa never possessed the puck. They outshot them 45-18. The, recent 2-time Cup champs went to the to the Stanley Cup Finals last season. A team that features Stamkos, Kucherov, Braden Point, Victor Hedman, and none of them were even the best player on the ice that night. They speed bagged them.
Yeah.
Didn't matter, because when you have a team that good, you just need one guy clicking, and that guy that was clicking was unfortunately in between the pipes.
45 saves and a shutout, and there's no... I'm going to be a little bit of a wet blanket in a second here, but there's no avoiding the fact that this is one of the best regular season goaltending performances we've seen in years. Definitely the best that the Red Wings fans have laid their eyes on. Up there with among the best, I'd say, in the last 5 years of all NHL regular season goaltending performances. Like, that was a clinic by Vasilevskiy. And there were grade A chances in there, and there was also knuckleballs. There was pucks that, caught Vasilevskiy while he was sliding, bounced, realistically should have gone through his legs. Was there some luck in there? Yeah, but you know how vibey of a position like the netminder is. Like, when you're feeling it, you're feeling it. And he was just stopping everything. There was a point where he made a massive save and then was squared up. I can't remember who the shooter was. They had a really low percentage shot, and Vasilevskiy kind of had his glove almost out of position. Like, he knew where the puck was going to go. And the Red Wings shooter put the puck right into his glove. And then he just casually spun his glove around and got up because the play was it's like he knew 3 seconds ahead what was going to happen. We are watching, and I know I'm being dramatic here because it just happened in our faces, but we are watching one of the greatest goaltenders of all time play right now at the height of his game. Andrei Vasilevskiy is a freak of nature. And for Red Wings fans, this is when you hear the doomers, not that I necessarily agree with them, but when you hear the doomers say, well, the Red Wings are not ready for the playoffs, and there's another thing coming if the Red Wings do make it, this is a window into what playoff hockey is. It's not just the other teams being much better. You also have to get used to seeing the other team's best goalies, which the Red Wings have not seen a lot of over the last 7 years.
Almost every other team in the playoff hunt has a superstar.
Yeah.
Tampa seems to have a few of them, but
at every position.
And they definitely flexed that last night right in our face.
You know what? It's it's probably a good constructive reminder for the fan base of the throws and the setbacks of trying to play meaningful hockey are.
Yeah, I don't know how the Doomers come away from that game and say the Red Wings aren't ready for playoff hockey. You're absolutely right. It's a preview. It's a window into it, and it's not always going to go your way when teams have 6, 7, 8, 9, 23 superstars.
Right.
The Tampa is hot on the heels of Toronto, so they had a lot to play for as well. This was not just another game for them, and you could tell they knew that, hence why Vasilevskiy was starting. And Detroit dominated. They walked out there. Again, they got goal lead. It happens. If the Red Wings had a best-of-7 playoff series with Tampa starting tomorrow, do you think one game goes like that? Do you think a single game in that series goes like that?
No.
So the fact the Red Wings did it at all is a good window into the fact that, hey, maybe if they get to the playoffs, it won't be a 4-game sweep. Maybe they don't get dummied by Boston. Maybe they don't get absolutely pasted by Carolina. Maybe they make a series of it. Again, they lost the game. I understand that. But they can hang with the big boys. They just beat the Rangers convincingly, dominating all 3 zones. They should have beat the Lightning convincingly, dominating all 3 zones. This is a huge positive. I know we're at the point of the rebuild, and this season especially, where we're past moral victories. So if you want to look at the whole picture, was Saturday acceptable? No, absolutely not. But if you are still in the camp of moral victories means something, these last 2 games were probably the biggest window into what are these Red Wings and should they be here? And the answer is a resounding yes.
Yep.
They absolutely should be here. They belong in this race. They belong in the playoff conversation. Now, as you've laid out with the Eastern Conference standings right now and the fact that they lost 1 game in what feels like the last month, and they dropped 2-3 spots out of a playoff spot, just goes to show you what
the swings are going to be wild.
They are going to be absolute on the extreme end of things, and good.
Yep.
This is what we've been waiting for. They've got a back-to-back coming up against Ottawa, a team that is 4 points behind them, at least as of yesterday was 4 points behind them. Detroit has to take 4 points here.
Yep.
This is the part, any team below them in the standings or in the wild card race with them cannot lose. Can't. If you lose a couple to the Tampas, the New Yorks, the Carolinas, the Bostons here and there, expected. The Red Wings, we all know, they're not going undefeated the rest of the season. They have to carry a 600-something points percentage to get in. Can't be giving up points to Ottawa. If you win 1 in overtime and 1 in regulation and you give Ottawa a point, fine. But Detroit has to get 2 in each of these games.
Something I want to say about the Tampa game, Vasilevskiy did play great. I just outlined in a very grand way about how good he is, a god amongst men in terms of goaltenders. Something that might be uncomfortable, but I want to acknowledge, the Red Wings don't have good finishing talent. We've talked about it ad nauseum, but they have no elite finishers on this team. I think their shot selection was a little bit... I understand why it was desperate towards the latter half of the game.
His night was difficult via volume rather than quality.
I'd say not completely, but largely, yeah.
Kind of. It depends. You could almost split that game into two halves in terms of what the Red Wings were generating. And I will say in the third period, it was very noticeable. You are right. The Red Wings don't have, that top end superstar talent. And their biggest problem right now is they lack finishers. I have no argument to that. I agree fully. That's why I always try to judge the Red Wings within the means of what they have. Right? Like any game they dominate, I don't ever expect them to score 8 goals because they just don't have the scoring talent to score 8 goals. So if they get 45 shots in a game, I probably expect 4 to 5 goals that game. You know what I'm saying? I feel like in the third period, the shot quality would have been better than it was if the first 2 periods didn't play out like they were. You could tell
Larkin was ready to stare a laser beam through Vasilevskiy's eyes.
They were trying to make that extra backdoor pass because they knew they weren't scoring from where they were. One play where Zadina walked in, had a chance in the slot, passed it up. You saw Larkin get in the slot and try a backdoor to want to say Bertuzzi. A lot of cross-crease passes. You could tell they were spooked. You could tell they're like, okay, I don't care how good of a shooter I am or am not. I'm not scoring from here on this guy. Whereas 99 out of 100 times, any other goalie, any other day, even Vasilevskiy on any other day, they're trying those shots. And they'd be successful on a bunch of them, but they just knew. You could see it, the overthinking, the overpassing. So had they played that game as if Vasilevskiy hadn't played those 2 previous periods, we probably see more higher quality chances because they're going to take those shots. They're not going to try to overcomplicate what should be a simple play.
One thing I want to acknowledge, actually going back to the Ranger game quickly, not to spend a lot of time on it because I just am exhausted by spending time on complaining about refs, but how funny was it on last episode where Brad said word for word that cross-check to the face is black and white. Like, you don't have to like it as a Red Wings fan, but you have to make that call as a referee. And then Lindgren in the Rangers game cross-checks Michael Rasmussen, not in the exact same way, but the impact sure felt the same. It was a cross-check that went to the face, caught him in the chin. I think the same result, like Rasmussen was hurt in the moment, came back to the game, same as TJ Oshie. They reviewed the play. They called it 2 minutes. I understand, like you don't, like we said last episode, the referees don't care about previous calls, but that was a miss in that moment. That's a miss in terms of NHL standards of refereeing. That whole game was officiated poorly. Like the Rasmussen laid a clean hit on Panarin. That was the softest charging call I've seen in a long time. Like that's not a charge. Plain and simple. Call me biased. That's a weak soft call. He got then mugged from behind by Fox, who was then Rasmussen was down on his back or Fox was on his back or whatever. And then Rasmussen got the extra for the charge and roughing. I'm sorry.
Oh, don't look at me. I'm on your side.
Just the way that game was managed front to end was crappy. Forget the minor penalties and that Rasmussen getting the extra. I just think how funny that last episode we preached. Like, you don't have to like it. Cross checks to the face are going to get that major.
Yeah, I said a cross check to the face is black and white. I never said I expect the NHL to get that right 100% of the time. I don't expect the NHL to get anything when it comes to officiating right 20% of the time. And it feels like we're always ripping on the refs, but that's just the nature of sports. You're always going to be unsatisfied anytime there's any sort of bad non-call or call towards your favorite team. And we always understand that. But this is getting to be a real problem beyond just the Red Wings game.
Yeah.
If those 2 plays, the Lindgren cross-check and the Larkin cross-check, were called exactly the way they were, but there were no reviews on either of them, I think we're 75% less pissed off right now. The fact that they were reviewed and deemed to be different is what makes the absurdity of it more clear.
Well, until the next one.
The only greater job where you can suck at your job is being a weatherman.
So last bit of Red Wings news before we cut to our quick segment with Max here. Michael Rasmussen took a puck to the kneecap, it looked like, in the Tampa Bay game, left in some pain. The Red Wings announced today that he is out indefinitely. I've seen it described as week to week, but it's undoubtedly a fact that he's not going to be back anytime soon. These are the most important weeks of hockey the Red Wings have had in years. And Michael Rasmussen, though not necessarily a top-line player, has cemented himself as being an impact player, especially in the Red Wings' depth, using his physicality a little bit more, that kind of thing. How big of a hit is this to the Red Wings, and what's the lineup impact?
Well, the lineup impact is nobody has to come out now when Raymond gets back.
Yeah.
That's Lucas Raymond's spots there. So it's not a good situation, but at least it's already been a rotation of guys who don't deserve to be scratched getting scratched just to make the roster work. Imagine that rotation if it had to be two guys. That would be very, very tricky for Lalonde to juggle. So that, and given that Vrana is probably the most likely Red Wing to be traded this week, it provides a resolution there. Obviously, losing Rasmussen, though he's not a top six player, he is a very effective player, and that's a big blow.
Yeah.
Offensively, he is what he is, and he'll give you your 30 to 40 points a year. But the fact that he can play all situations for the most part, and his versatility comes in handy a lot. Again, I don't think it takes the Red Wings out of the playoff race by any means. And obviously with Lucas Raymond coming back in his spot, that's still an upgrade on what they've had for the last couple weeks. But yeah, it hurts. There's no way around it.
You mentioned Vrana, most likely to be traded. That's stemming off of reports. Last episode, we had that insert where basically the Red Wings sent down Vrana. And at the end of the insert, we said, this could also be just a paper move, and that's what it ended up being, essentially a bunch of cap stuff. But without diving too much into the rules, the Red Wings were minimizing his on-roster days to extend his waiver exempt eligibility for as long as possible. Regardless, Vrana actually got in the next game. Vrana, Zadina, and Berggren seem to be the players who have been rotating in and out, while the Red Wings, it's going to sound crummy to say, but waited for an injury. Remember, this was a very healthy forward group. Like, Lucas Raymond is an important player to be out, but just one player being out of your forward group at this point in the season is actually kind of impressive. So while it was just one injury, yeah, it was Zadina, Berggren, and Vrana cycling in. So Vrana was actually in for the Rangers game, out for the Tampa game. Berggren was out for the Tampa game, or the Rangers game, and in for the Tampa game. Berggren kind of looked iffy. Against Tampa, I think the grind and the physicality of the season is maybe wearing on him a little bit right now. I wonder if he isn't a little banged up, but Elliot Friedman then also said, he was talking to Jeff Merrick on 32 Thoughts. It was mentioned that this is the Red Wings showcasing Vrana, and he said, yeah, absolutely, they're showcasing Vrana. The Red Wings are essentially trying to get him in as much as possible right now to see what teams are coming to watch, to see what teams are interested. Remember, Timo Meier, he's been traded to New Jersey. We're still waiting on the return, but that's a shooting talent. That's a goal-scoring talent. Is Vrana there? No, not at all. But if you can look past all of the very important, opaque context in front of it, there's still a talented shooter under there that teams may be looking at and saying, well, Vrana's value is at his lowest. It's a risk because there's a human element to this that we don't know how it's going to play out. But could we trade for him and get him into a new situation and extract something out of him? So this is the Red Wings trying to essentially get themselves out of $5.25 million next year, create that roster spot, and potentially get something in return. It was mentioned by Friedman that the Red Wings may have to incentivize because of the dollar value next year. I believe that's probably a very high possibility, although personally I don't love that. Just because I don't love it doesn't mean it's not going to happen, though.
Yeah, and incentivizing could be giving up an asset to take the full contract or retaining salary to make it a little more palatable for the other team. Both options are likely on the table. Because you look out on the teams that missed out on Timo Meier now, Carolina, as an example, might be like, yeah, we don't love the player, but we really need to fill this hole, on power play 2 or whatever the reasoning might be. he might be a guy they turn to, and he's been a successful player in his career. Someone's going to go, but we can fix him, right?
Yeah.
And if nobody steps up to the plate, maybe that team that's like, well, maybe we can fix him could be the Red Wings. Never know. If there's no takers, you can't just, I shouldn't say can't. You don't want to just bury $5.25 million of a talented shooter in the minors for a year and a half. You got to see what you can get. And with Vrana, we know it'll be a mixed bag because in the 2 games he played, I felt he had a very strong game against Washington, and I didn't love his game against the Rangers. So, it is what it is. And it's only 2 games up from the minors, so it's kind of probably to be expected, but they have options. Not many of them good, but they have options.
Inevitably, there are going to be questions here saying, I can't believe you guys are talking about this Vrana situation so normally as if it's okay to have such a talented shooter, on the fringe of the lineup. 2 things here. 1, the situation is still fluid. Things could change. Please know that. And 2, if Vrana's playing level was where it was at last season, when he was playing and at his best, this conversation wouldn't be happening right now. I know it's really, really, really hard to kind of wrap your head around, like, how does this fall off so fast? This isn't a normal player progression thing. This isn't coming back from injury. It's coming back from a lot more, something that disrupts more than just your on-ice play. It's everything in Vrana's life. So this is a nuanced, complicated story that's going to unravel over time. We know how insane it all sounds, but this is the reality of what's happening right now.
There's so much going on that we forget. He is also coming back from an injury.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Let's jump into our conversation here with Max Bultman of the Athletic Detroit. Max, I caught him after the flight, and he was going to get himself a new wardrobe because he forgot his suitcase going to Ottawa. But for what he lacks in remembering his suitcase, he more than makes up for with his excellent work for the Athletic Detroit and his read on the Red Wings. So here to give us the good stuff and talk all about the Red Wings' position at the deadline and more, Max Bultman of the Athletic Detroit. Enjoy. Max, this is very hockey insider of you. I'm trying to pin down some of your time, and the best we could do is capturing you in an Uber. So I think this is a sign that things are going well in terms of the hockey world and your coverage.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, we would have had an easier time figuring it out if I hadn't walked out of the house this morning without my suitcase. So now I have to go scramble to buy a whole new wardrobe in Ottawa here for this 2-game series. But we'll make it work, right?
Yeah, it's like the adult version of forgetting your hockey bag at home when your parents are driving you to your game out of town.
Yeah, exactly.
So, Max, like you mentioned, you're off to cover the Red Wings on their 2-game, both in Ottawa trip north of the border. But of course, the big story here is that these games are impactful. Our original plan, to be completely transparent with the viewers, was we've been talking for a few months of, all right, we're going to do the trade deadline, and then the Winged Wheel podcast and Prashant and you are all going to sit down and talk about a post deadline and where the Red Wings are at and what are they going to do this offseason. But plans have changed. As Steve Yzerman mentioned on his interview on Alan Walsh's podcast, Agent Provocateur, he's finding the Red Wings in a little bit of a different spot than maybe they anticipated in January. So what do you make of everything the Red Wings have done to put themselves in the playoff mix? And do you think it's seriously changed the trajectory of how Yzerman is approaching this trade deadline?
I do, and I think he basically said as much on that podcast. If you go listen back to it, right, he kind of talked about being somewhere in the middle of being a buyer and a seller, being open to make a trade, doesn't want to, spend their high, real high caliber young players on something unless they know the player is going to be there for a long time coming back or part of the future at least. But I thought it was really interesting. He told this story, this kind of memory from his first year in Tampa in 10-11. He expected to have a top 10 pick, expected to sell. And in the end, they end up buying. They trade for Eric Brewer. I kind of wonder if we see something similar happen now here because they are not only in this playoff race. I mean, they don't have the spot right now, but they look like they're going to be a threat to stay in it. So, yes, I think things have changed significantly, and I think he all but said it on that podcast.
Now, Max, a lot of our conversations on the side here have been, well, pretty much mindsets have been changing over time, and quite admittedly, I had a lot of skepticism coming into it, and it all started with the decision to pull Tyler Bertuzzi off the market. I mean, for now, the big caveat that anything can happen, but for me personally, I had I just don't see it to, all right, the proof is in the pudding. They're putting up the points to, yeah, once you start to see the rest of the teams in the Eastern mix, I genuinely believe the Red Wings can do this. And based on the hype and the excitement and the value of the playoffs, I'm actually kind of in favor of this. Have you had any kind of a difference in opinion over the last 4 weeks?
Yeah, I mean, when I first heard that they might pull Bertuzzi off the market, I was thinking kind of like, oh no, that feels short-sighted. And they just kept winning like over and over again. And at some point the math gets so good. I think there's still, I think it's like a 30% chance right here, but that's good enough. Like that's good enough to chase it. At the time I think it came out, I think they were around like 8%, and I was kind of thinking, no, that's not enough to risk it. But you get this close, and I think especially if you were to go out and add a piece and try to boost those chances, then all of a sudden I do think that's close enough. And so that it's been a complete 180 for me. I thought like, what are they thinking the first time I heard that? And as they've kept winning, obviously the loss last night, but one of their better efforts of the season, my thinking's changed completely.
Before we get into the boring stuff, which is what do you think is the most realistic, let's have some fun. You wrote an article on the Athletic Detroit, which we're going to link to in the description of this episode. Pretty much in the hypothetical, if the Red Wings were to buy, akin to what he did with Tampa Bay in that surprising year where they went to the conference finals, who are some likely targets? And you named some people in this article that I think are really interesting. Who are some of the players where you think would be, I think, the most realistic if this were to be how things were to play out for the Red Wings?
Yeah, so obviously, to the point of the last question, right? Like it's been a little bit of catch up on the who's available on the buyer's side of things, non-rental edition, right? Because we're talking about mostly non-rentals. I did throw Nick Jensen's name in there just because I think he's so good at maybe their biggest position in need, which is third pair right D. Obviously beyond kind of the high end forward that I think everyone knows they could certainly use. The guys that I listed that I think stood out the most to me were Tanner Jeannot from the Nashville Predators and Matt Roy from LA. Both guys who have team control remaining. Both guys have elements that they don't have. Roy, I was shocked to even see his name had been out there because he's playing on the second pair for another playoff team right now in Los Angeles. But it is a crowded situation there. It's a kind of an area of strength for the Kings. If they would move him, he's got a little term left. I think that's a now solution, and it's a next year solution. I think that would be a really interesting option. And then Tanner Jeannot, it's not like I think these Red Wings are soft or anything, but they just don't have that real edge physical element to them, right? I think they compete, but they don't have that guy who it kind of strikes fear into you. So Tanner Jeannot led all NHL forwards in hits last season, and oh, by the way, he had 24 goals. The shooting has regressed significantly this year with shooting percentage, but it's kind of over regressed. And I wonder if you could maybe get him a little cheaper as a result. I don't think Nashville is going to be eager to get rid of him by any means, but he's arbitration eligible. That's been pointed out. And sometimes that makes teams do different things. So those are two guys that stood out. I will say, I was reading our Athletic Bold Predictions column the other day, and our Hurricanes writer, Corey Lavalette, said he thought the Capitals should make a play for Tom Wilson. If under any circumstances Tom Wilson is out there, that answers every box, right? And I think that would be a home run. Now, I imagine that's a little costlier, but I thought that really was interesting and stood out to me.
It's interesting, like the Nick Jensen piece, the Matt Roy piece, obviously that third pair right D, that's the focus because it's Lindstrom, it's Hag, it's whoever's there, where some games you think, they're holding their own, and then Hag the other night obviously had a huge stinker. It's been such a massive change because before Red Wings fans were looking at that third pair saying, well, that's not quite what matters. Like the rest of their defense really needs to be filled out. So, you fill out that right side on the third pair. How competitive could you view that Red Wings blue line? Let's say Seider, Wollman, Mata, Hronek, Sherratt, and then whoever they bring in no particular order, because I know Derek Lalonde's not particularly want to put Sherratt on the third pair. How competitive could you view that defensive core in a playoff series?
I think it would be a playoff decor at that point. I mean, I think obviously you need Seider to kind of play like the star, but he and Wollman have played at an elite level, especially defensively. And I think that goes a long way. I thought Filip Hronek against the Lightning the other night was outstanding. Obviously, they lose the game, but I really liked a lot of what I saw from him against some of the Lightning's really battle-tested players. So, yes, I think it's a playoff decor. I think, that last spot on the third pair is probably the last big hole. And I guess the concern here is, right, like, you want to bring back Wallman, and if you do, and you go out and you get another D with term, now you got 6 guys under contract for next season. You still don't have Simon Edvinsson in the fold. I think it's a real valid talking point, but at some point I think injuries are going to happen. And if you're going to be serious about going for it this year, I think a guy with some term, not like super long term, I still think that makes sense.
Now, the Red Wings announced today that Michael Rasmussen is out indefinitely. I think they called it week to week. He took that shot to the kneecap last night. Didn't look pretty. He was in a considerable amount of pain. With him being out for the foreseeable future, does that change the needle? Does that change Yzerman's focus? Does that make him more of a buyer to try to replace that? Or does that cause, if you're the Red Wings, some concern to say, okay, how much does this one injury hurt us here?
It's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I think we'll probably know a little more after we see 2 games in Ottawa these next 2 nights. But that's a big loss for them, and we'll see how long. I think today, I wasn't at practice today. I was flying, but I think I saw the update was indefinite. I mean, that's not what you want to hear when you're in a playoff race, obviously. So that is, I think, an important factor in all of this for the Red Wings, because he's been as good as anybody since the All-Star break.
Now, in terms of forward slot, again, obviously that means they don't have to free up a roster spot for when Lucas Raymond is back from injury, which you would hope would be just Monday here. But Vrana is always kind of the player people have their eyes on. The Red Wings have been slotting him into the roster a bit. He wasn't in last night, but it's been reported by Elliot Friedman and others that this is very much the Red Wings showcasing Vrana for other teams who are interested in adding talent for a value cost. What do you make of the Vrana situation, and does he qualify as the most likely Red Wing to move at this upcoming trade deadline?
I guess probably. I mean, unless they lose 3 straight here and decide to sell or something. But I think that's probably true. The question for me is, like, is it really going to be a needle moving return? I mean, obviously, if you're doing it, it's probably just to kind of part ways. And, I don't think that's necessarily like a big needle moving return, in my opinion, but we'll see where it goes. I think that situation by now kind of seems like it's gone in every which direction. So it would not surprise me if he's moved, but it would not surprise me if he stays put and that gets resolved in the offseason either.
And now, last one here, because I know you have a hotel to check into and a brand new outfit to buy. The Red Wings, like you mentioned, have 3 games before the deadline, 2 against Ottawa and 1 against Seattle. Do you think there's any combination of games, results in these games that could change Yzerman and the Red Wings management's mindset as to how to approach the deadline? Or do you feel like they're locked in now based on the fact that they're in the mix at this point?
I think it would probably need to be 3 losses, right, to change anything. I don't think winning's changing anything. I think that's at this point what will be par. But I think 3 losses, or I don't know, maybe if you only get 1 win and it's a shaky one, I guess. But my feeling would probably be, it's probably, if you win any of these, I think you probably put yourself in a position to add, because you're still going to be within 2 to 3 points of that last wild card at that point.
All right, Max. Well, we're going to have you on plenty more, and we'll see how Friday goes. So best of luck with your shopping spree, and have fun in Ottawa for the next couple of days, and we'll chat with you post-deadline.
Thank you. That sounds good, man. Appreciate you being flexible with me. All
right, folks. Max Bultman, The Athletic Detroit. As always, link in the description. Go subscribe. Well worth it. Take care. And that was our quick but fruitful conversation with Max Bultman. Always appreciate Max coming onto the show, and be sure to check out his article. More from him after the deadline. Speaking of the deadline, where the Red Wings stand right now is technically out of the playoff picture. By points percentage, they are the first team out of a wild card spot. But there's going to be a lot of movement. Like I said, they have equal games played to Buffalo and Pittsburgh, who are by points percentage in, and Ottawa, who, like you said, Brad, are only 4 points behind them, and they have games in hand on the Islanders, Florida, and Washington. Still, the Red Wings are in the mix, even if not in it right now. They have 2 really important, in-division games coming up Monday, Tuesday against Ottawa, and then, of course, they have Seattle on Thursday, and that's everything they have before the trade deadline. So with where they are at right now, are the Red Wings buyers of any capacity? Are they sellers of any capacity? And do you think there's still room to change based on the results of these upcoming 3 games?
Last episode, I said I have no idea what these Red Wings are anymore, and I continue to sort of feel that way.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think they are buyers or sellers. I think, maybe there's a smart move, whether that be a trade Jakub Vrana for some draft capital or a prospect, or there's a buy player X from this team to help somewhere in the lineup. I think that's sort of maybe more the direction they go. But in terms of big game hunting, I think every other team who are serious contenders are the ones doing the throwing all the chips in right now. And I don't think, depending on who it is, if it's Connor McDavid, yes, be involved. But I don't think this right now is the year to go and start throwing chips in. I think the Red Wings just need to make smart, strategic type plays. But maybe things might not materialize in that way. Like, it seems like all the true contenders right now are just going big game hunting. So something might materialize. There's always teams that sort of get nervous when other players start to go off the board. So something might come up out of nowhere that we don't really expect. Only time will tell, I guess.
What's your appetite for, we've talked about this a little bit and Max mentioned some of it, something further down the lineup, third pair, maybe even second pair right D, something that could be had for let's call it as high as third round pick and middling prospect, second round pick and value, but more middle picks just to add that supplementary piece. We're not talking Timo Meier for obvious reasons anymore, but what's your appetite for buying in that capacity?
I hate giving non-answers on this podcast because it's boring content, but I'm essentially going to give a non-answer here. It depends. It really does. Do I have any appetite to give up a second round pick plus in terms of value for something this year? No, absolutely not. That is 100% off the table if we're talking like rentals, depth piece, etc. No appetite for that whatsoever. The Red Wings, if you look at that roster and if you want to look at hyper-focused specific spots beyond just, the talent gap at the top of the lineup between the Red Wings and other teams, they have one problem, I would say. Third pair right D. They've tried Hägg, Osterley, Lindstrom. None of them are it. Osterley's probably the best of the bunch, and he still leaves a lot to be desired. They gave Hägg some run. He's terrible.
I can't believe I actually... That game...
everybody gets one.
That Rangers game was... I don't think he's been particularly good all year, but I was like, I want to recognize a guy further down the lineup who's done a little bit better. And then that Rangers game, I was like, my God,
it's off. So they tried. Lindstrom's only played like 3 of the last 10 games, so they threw him back in. He was bad. In a game where the Red Wings was dominant, you still noticed he wasn't it. He played 12 seconds at the end of a power play and took what I can only describe as the worst, most ill-timed, and worst. I don't even know how to least effective point shot I've ever seen in the history of hockey.
You've not seen me play, man. My point shot was bad.
He literally tried a saucer pass to the front of the net and hit the Tampa defense in the chest, and it went down the other way.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah. So anyways, that spot, if the Red Wings were to toss a 4th, 5th, 6th round pick at a team to shore that hole up, okay. I think the Red Wings have enough draft capital and enough prospects that a mid-round pick at this point is not consequential to their future. Again, you still want, balls in the hopper. You still want the lottery picks. You still want the chance. But honestly, the Red Wings, once you get out of the first round, haven't been particularly effective in drafting in a long time.
Yeah.
There was actually a stat that came out that showed they were the bottom third of the league, and obviously that some of that's Yzerman, some of that's the Holland era, so it's hard to get an exact feel. But either way, they haven't been great at it. So I have no problems, but the premium picks, so we'll call them first and second round picks or equivalent prospects, absolutely not, no chance, unless you're going big game hunting, which we talked about, because the Red Wings, that third pair right D and first line, that's their problem. They have no I really, really, truly like this roster everywhere in between.
It's come together really nicely.
Right.
Is it the best of each line, best second line, best third line, best fourth line? No, it's not the best. Of course, there can always be improvements, but in terms of holes, like true deficiencies, elite scoring, depth, right D.
Like, if you break down the Red Wings forward line specifically and you rank them across the rest of the NHL, the problem becomes pretty apparent pretty quick. Right now, over the last month, I would argue the Red Wings might have the best fourth line in hockey. The way they're producing, the way they're playing, the way they have been consistently doing this now for a prolonged period of time, their third line is probably well above league average. Right now, their second line is probably considerably below league average, and their first line on the good games is average at best. Like, that's the problem. You would ideally not like David Perron on your top line. You would prefer him on your second line. You probably don't want Andrew Copp as your second line center. You probably want to slot him down a little bit. Larkin and Raymond are probably the only true first liners on this team. Bertuzzi has his nights, and obviously there's been a lot more of them lately than there were at the beginning and middle of the season between the injuries. But to be a Stanley Cup contender, you need Dylan Larkin or Lucas Raymond playing on your second line because you need first line caliber players down the lineup. That's how you win. Look at Tampa. Like, Anthony Cirelli's on their third line. He might win a Selke one day. Like, you need to have those luxuries, and the Red Wings are still steps away from that. So where I'm at for the trade deadline, coming from a seller standpoint for the Red Wings, I would not be actively shopping anybody. I just wouldn't. The depth is their key. That's how they're going to get in. Now, that obviously comes with a caveat. I would sell anybody on this team at any point for the right price. But you have to be realistic. Are those prices going to come? No, of course not. Otherwise,
those kinds of trades just don't happen in the NHL.
Exactly. If Edmonton said, hey, we're going to give you 4 first-round picks and our top prospects for Dylan Larkin, you go, okay, yes, please, thank you. But that doesn't happen. So I don't expect them to be sellers. If a good enough, I think Bertuzzi might be the only player where they get an offer so good they can't say no. But I call that unlikely. Because they have so much depth at forward, I would not be surprised to see maybe a Vrana or, insert other pending UFA here, Sundqvist hypothetically, traded for a decent return. Sure. I could see that.
Yeah.
But as a buyer, no. You are either getting Chychrun or Nick Jensen. Like, there should be no in between there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm with you, Brad. I've firmly had my mind changed based on just like, look at how more meaningful this hockey is for the Red Wings players, but just the city of Detroit, for Hockeytown, and I mean both Hockeytown, the place, and the collective of Red Wings fans around the world. Like, Red Wings fans are feeling something they haven't felt in a decade recently, or near on a decade, and that does mean something. I've said this a million times on this podcast, and I know anytime anyone who works in the league hears me say this, they laugh and they say, okay, easy for you to say, but I don't cry for millionaires and billionaires. Like, I don't, it's not our job to care about the bottom line, but it is Steve Yzerman's job to some capacity to care about the bottom line. How much, that's an argument for a different day, and we had that plenty when we talked about Ken Holland and pressure from ownership to keep making the playoffs. And that's a different argument. But I understand the business side of things. Do I agree? Do I care? Irrelevant. But I do care about the meaningful hockey for Red Wings fans, the meaningful hockey for the players. And I think once you start to say, like, yeah, I want to start making the playoffs perennially, you don't want your best roster coming into a year where your most important players have never done this before. I think Tampa Bay's advantage, or the reason they were able to get over the hill eventually, and it was a long while, is their best players had experience. So there was a little bit of been there, done that. So it's never too soon to start that. I've been sold on making the playoffs. So yeah, I'm very happy to give up decent but not top assets if it can help them get a push over the edge. Alex Tuch is out on IR, and he obviously for Buffalo, that's a big hit. That's an opportunity for Detroit. That's a big player. They're up there with Pittsburgh and the Islanders and whoever else as the most likely threats for one of those 2 wildcard spots. So if you can add while they're losing, I think that's something that you should try to do. But yeah, I'm not doing it. I'm not overpaying and giving a second round pick for a middle 6 forward or something like that. It has to be filling in a deficiency, and it has to be where you're either not feeling the hurt or the big shiny prizes you're getting is worth giving up, a first plus Berggren plus whatever else that you'd have to give up. The latter doesn't happen too often. I don't want to say it's impossible. I agree with you that Bertuzzi still might go for the right price when we do our trade deadline primer. Also, I guess we never acknowledged this was meant to be our trade deadline primer episode. It's not, because the Red Wings keep doing this playoff thing. So we're going to do that on Wednesday for you, but we'll know a little bit more by then, hopefully, about the Bertuzzi situation. I think I think the team is very much going to try to get out on Vrana so they don't have to buy him out. And I think they feel, not certainly, I'm not going to put it out there certainly, but I think they feel that it's likely that they would have to, unless a lot changes.
Yeah, and right now, you look at the conversations we were having 3 weeks ago compared to now, it's stating the obvious to point out that this is very fluid. Things can change rapidly. If the Red Wings collect 0 out of 4 points from Ottawa, we might be having a very different conversation midweek, because they could be 6, 7, 8 points out of a playoff spot by the time the trade deadline hits still. That is very much in the realm of possibility. Now, the way the Red Wings have been playing and the way they just played against Tampa and New York, if they take 0 out of 4 points from Ottawa, that might be one of the biggest anomalies of the season. But, it's the Red Wings. We've been around here for the last 7 years. We know that is very much in the cards. So it's still very fluid. There's still a lot of possibilities. I think the ultimate reality here is, if you ask me, do I think the Red Wings are buyers or sellers? My answer is no, because I don't think they're really going to be either. I think they understand that this group is good enough to make a push, but maybe not get in. But they're also too good to tank. So you kind of just ride it.
Yeah.
And then if they get in and they're still competing, amazing. But if they don't, it's not the end of the world. You didn't lose assets for nothing. I wouldn't be surprised if Yzerman went out and traded for someone with a bit of term.
Mm-hmm.
That could be very much in the cards. There are players out there. There could be some salary cap shenanigans in terms of moving money around just to get maybe a player who slots better. I know I floated the idea probably about 6 weeks ago, something around Vrana and Besser, 2 overpaid slumping forwards. Maybe that's what the Red Wings try. Hey, Vrana's not working here. You guys try him. Besser's not really working there. We'll try him here. Maybe. Again, not super likely, but in the cards. So, yeah, ultimately, I think it's going to be a very quiet trade deadline for the Red Wings. 1, maybe 2 trades. Anything more than that, I'd at this point actually be surprised.
So, again, our trade deadline primer is going to come to you Wednesday night when we know more. These 2 games against Ottawa are going to mean a lot for Detroit's playoff push and trade deadline positioning. Yes, that's a real sentence that I'm saying in this year, 2023. Oh, how times change. So thank you for your patience. I know today's supposed to be the primer, but we're in the business of not playing with fire. And in the trade world and Steve Yzerman's world, news changes in a flash. Very quickly here, I'm just going to recap some things that are happening or have happened. We're going to recap these trades, I think, more earnestly over the next couple episodes, but just so folks know, some trades that have happened over the last little while. Ottawa dumped Nikita Zaitsev, a 2nd and a 4th round pick, just to dump Zaitsev's cap, so they got future considerations back. Boston ended up bringing in Garnet Hathaway and Dmitry Orlov. They used Minnesota as a middleman to retain salary, and Washington got Craig Smith, a 1st, a 3rd, and a 2nd in 2025 in exchange for a more complicated trade, but for those 2 players. The Rangers dumped Vitaly Kravtsov, who wasn't getting to the lineup there, wasn't very well liked by Gallant, it seemed. Vancouver got him for a 7th and a William Lockwood, I think 23-ish year old prospect, but cheap price to pay for a guy who could end up panning out.
Weird. I wonder why the Rangers would be trying to clear some cap space right now.
Yeah,
odd. And it's weird. Braden Schneider and Ryan Carpenter are not going to be taking a shift tonight for roster management reasons. Weird. Oddly, did you see Patrick Kane didn't play last night?
That's right.
Wonder if there's anything there.
And I think it's by tomorrow, Rangers will technically have accrued enough cap space to make a hypothetical trade for someone of Kane's salary?
I heard Wednesday, but it's
Yeah.
basically every day matters right now.
Yeah.
Odd. I'm sure it's all just a coincidence.
Cap space is accrued daily. This is a reminder of that. It's not often relevant to Detroit, but for teams who are doing this, every dollar matters.
Remember in the offseason, right before the beginning of the season, we were laughing because the Leafs got to within $4 of the salary cap. Literally every day matters.
Yeah. The Winnipeg Jets obviously were out on Timo Meier. Meier didn't want to stay there long term, so they said screw it. They went out and got Niederreiter for a second round pick. Ivan Barbashev to the Golden Knights in exchange for prospect Zach Dean, and I think that's a meatier deal than people kind of give credit to, both for players moving both ways. I like Zach Dean, the prospect, and Timo Meier to the Devils, and we gave the NHL more than an hour here, and we still don't know the return.
Teams in the Western Conference, listen to me.
Stop
Listen.
sending them here.
This conference is already a big enough shit show. Stop loading it. Could one team in the West trade for somebody of any significance, with all due respect to Ivan Barbashev? Like, Niederreiter was already out there. Like, every team in the West is selling, but the big names are coming east. Remember when the Wings were in the Western Conference forever, and the Western Conference was the Thunderdome forever? And then it seemed like the exact year the Red Wings switched back to the Eastern Conference, it flipped, and now the East is the Thunderdome, and the West is lagging behind significantly. What the shit? Can we... this is our penance for that Central Division forever.
Oh, absolutely.
This is our penance for that.
Yeah. All those years of dunking on Columbus and Nashville.
And Chicago was horrible then, too, don't forget. It was basically us and St. Louis forever.
So the Red Wings they were the Monstars all season and didn't get really, really hard tests for most years until the playoffs. They've deserved all their success, but the playoffs were when the real tests came. Yeah, this is absolutely the flip side. I've seen Thunderdome divisions. There's always a division or even a conference every year where you're like, yeah, stronger. The East is this is the most egregious I've ever seen it, and it's a way where I'm like, I don't see these players leaving here. Like, this is in my mind another argument for the cap, because if not for the salary cap, it can get so loaded on one side so easily, and there'd be no mechanism to force those players out onto other teams. Because the only saving grace here for the teams, trying to crack the top of the Atlantic or trying to crack the top of the Metro is, well, eventually these guys are going to have to pay for these players. These teams are going to have to pay for these players at, full rate, and they're not going to be able to afford them all, and they're going to have to trade them. That, in my mind, is it's the only thing you can hope for.
Legitimately, because in your opinion, who's the best team in the West right now?
It's hard to say. Is it
Edmonton,
Colorado? Neither of them are really playing like it. Colorado was injured. Edmonton's Edmonton. Dallas, maybe.
Dallas? Okay. Let's go with Dallas, just for argument's sake. Tell me when I name a team in the East that they are definitively better than. Toronto, Tampa, Boston, Carolina, the Rangers, New Jersey.
They can compete with the Rangers, I'd say.
Compete? Okay, that's not what my question was. The Rangers, the Devils, Buffalo.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah.
Detroit, Pittsburgh. They're a wild card team in the East right now.
The funny thing is, how likely is it now that we see a Western Conference Cup win, because it's going to be a bloodbath in the East?
I know we love dunking on them, but let's say this is the Leafs year. Their path to the Cup is likely Tampa, Boston, either Carolina or the Rangers, and then they're in the Stanley Cup Finals. I hate this playoff format so much.
It's terrible. It's so bad. It's so bad. I can't stand it.
Again, fun to dunk on the Leafs, and I love that it's them that are getting screwed by this. But you can't tell me arguably the fourth or fifth best team in the league has to run through the third, first, and arguably second best team in the league to get to the Cup final. That is bonkers.
So obviously quite a bit to cover on Wednesday's true trade deadline primer, not just in terms of the mega dome that is the East, but in terms of anything that might happen for the Red Wings. So stay tuned for that. For now, Brad and I are without Evan. He had to leave for the end of the podcast, and that's always a danger zone for us when we don't have him to keep us in check. So we're going to move over to Overtime. Overtime is brought to you again by our Patreon supporters, patreon.com/wingedwheelpodcast. Like we said at the top of the show, it really is what makes this show go round, and all of our growth, all of our success is really attributed to our Winged Wheel Podcast patrons, the Dub Club, so to speak. So to get any of those benefits, the Discord, the bonus episodes, the opportunity to win fun prizes like the tickets to the Red Wings game, do join if you are so inclined, and it means a lot to us. So thank you. Okay, we are going to take some questions and comments. We don't have a ton of time here, but we will make sure we get some. This one's a fun trivia one, actually. JM Rhapsody says, "Trivia time, you scallywags. Let me take you back February 14th, 2012. An inauspicious date, but a date which saw the Red Wings defeat the Dallas Stars 3-1. Why is this important? It was the 21st straight home victory for the Red Wings in NHL record. The question is, who was in the net for the Wings?" I actually remember this one.
2012. I actually did see the highlights pop up of this on something somewhere not that long ago. Might have been actually the Red Wings Instagram itself, I believe. Who was in net for that one? Because it wasn't Jimmy.
Nope.
Was it Joey McDonald?
It was Joey McDonald.
Joey McDonald.
20 of 21. It's funny because we were thinking back to old backups the other day, and Joey McDonald's name is one that came up. Oh, man, that was a different time. Hockeytown Racing Academy says, "Would you rather get smoked in the first round of the playoffs or land Adam Fantilli? We all know Detroit will never get the number one pick."
Well, that's easy.
That's Fantilli.
That's Fantilli 100 of 100 times.
The only reason we're not talking about that dichotomy now is because the Red Wings don't have the other side of that available to them. I don't think that they will be in a serious probable mix to land a top 2 spot.
If they miss the playoffs because of the way everything's shaking down, it's still in the realm of possibility that they finish 12th or 13th, just because there are so many teams in that cluster. That they could be 2 points out of a playoff spot and still pick 12. But even if they are in that 12 slot, it's a 2% chance. So yeah, it's not a high enough percentage that anybody should be taking that possibility seriously. Most of all, Steve Yzerman. Robert Wood, new patron. Robert, welcome to the Dub Club, and thank you for your support. Says Robert Woods, come back to Buffalo. Yo, I just joined a few days ago, been listening religiously since the start of this season, and look forward to every minute of each episode. Thank you, Robert. That means a lot to us. His question is, you hit your head and went into a coma. Don't threaten me with a good time. You wake up one day and the entire Red Wings roster has been swapped for the roster of another team, maybe the Sens or Buffalo, someone close to where the Wings are now. Who would you root for? The players in the Wings jersey or the ex-Wings players in new jerseys? Players in the Wings jersey. That's right. The winged wheel is what matters at the end of the day. It would be hard. Yeah. Oh, yeah. You never get a wholesale change like that, but so many players you love. But again, you look around the NHL. I can name off 50 players that don't play for the Red Wings that I'm a huge fan of, that I would root for, that I love. It's hockey. You can appreciate the player, but the team is always it. This one from Welcome to Houston says, my first and only Red Wings game at LCA to this point was the February 1st in 2020 game, a 1-0 shutout loss against the Rangers, Hank's last career shutout in the last game before COVID. It just warms my heart to see how far the team has come since then. That 4-1 win the other night was so satisfying. Am I crazy to think the Wings could mess around and win a playoff round this year? Eager to get back there, and I feel the best barn in the league rocking. It's not crazy. Hockey's a very random sport, but it's highly unlikely because their two likely destinations, if they make the playoffs, are Boston and Carolina. I don't love Carolina's goaltending, so that could be something that could be exploited there. Boston, top to bottom, they're the best team in the league. I just don't see how the Red Wings pull out 4 games against that, short of Marchand, Bergeron, and Ullmark all catching COVID the day of game 1. It would have to be injuries, illness, goalies just completely collapsing at the same time as the Red Wings goalie getting hot. And I'm naming these things and you're like, oh man, that is a lot to amount to. That would never happen. It's not likely. It has happened though. That's how these kinds of things do happen. Yeah. Ullmark just decides to turn around and shoot it in his own net for a change. Weird, really weird, unlikely things would have to happen. Or Ville Husso just channels his inner Andrei Vasilevskiy for a 10-day span.
I think none of this happens, though. Like, it needs to be on the back of a goalie. If you are a lower-seeded team, a true lower-seeded team, not like Colorado's about to make some top-seeded team playoffs a nightmare. If you're a true lower-seeded team, you need to excel based on the back of a goalie. That's how playoff success happens, like this in the NHL. This one from Lars Thorzel says, hello, boys. Is there any player on the wings that would benefit more from line mates with better hockey smarts than Jonathan Berggren? When I watch him play, I see loads of times he makes a play, but his fellow players are not aware of him seeing a seam to them, and they whiff on the puck and are surprised to get it. His cross pass back to Lindstrom the other night is one example that springs to mind. What's your call? Is Berggren the highest hockey IQ player on the team? Who would be the top three?
Berggren's definitely up there.
Raymond with him.
Raymond's with Larkin's with him.
Yeah.
It's tough to say because, off the puck hockey IQ matters too, and I don't think that's Berggren's biggest strength. I don't think it's a weakness, but yeah, it's probably the first three that jump to mind are Berggren, Raymond, and Larkin. I think you could make a really good case for Perron. I think you could make a really good case for Seider and Wallman. Hell, I know the talent's not to the level of those guys. I think you can make a really good case for Olli Maatta. Again,
defense is a different game than what people are looking at, but that's a good point.
And if you look at Olli Maatta at just his skill, he is not an above average NHLer, but he can be a good player because he is so smart out there.
Yeah. He is bottom third of the team in terms of skill, but in hockey smart's quite the inverse.
Yeah. So again, I think my answer is Berggren, Larkin, Raymond, but I think there's 3 or 4 other players that I listed you can make a really good case for.
And with Berggren, to call back to what I said earlier in the episode, I do think he's suffering a little bit with the physicality. He's been beat up on quite a bit. Like, not all just like hard hits, some like elbows up high, like welcome to the league kid kind of stuff, especially someone who wants the puck on his stick and does well like he generally does. Other teams are going to target that. I think that's worn on him. Again, I don't know if this is true, but I wonder if he is battling something small, nagging. And we saw it happen with Soderblom. You see it happen with most rookies in the NHL. Like, just your legs fall out from beneath you after a certain amount of time. Like, the NHL is hard hitting. It's demanding. It's fast. It's a dense schedule. This is more intense hockey than Berggren has played in his entire life. So we've been seeing a little bit more of uncharacteristic mistakes from him off the puck play, like you mentioned, Brad. It's the kind of stuff where you're like, okay, the Red Wings are needling him, and X player or Y veteran is doing these things. Well, you needle your rookies because you know they can be better than that. So when they are veterans and when they are 25, 26 years old, that shit is out of their game. It's harsh, but that's baptism by fire there, and they learn that way. He would definitely benefit from better line mates. It will come. The Red Wings know that. There's just a lot more responsibility that comes with that kind of deployment that's not always inherently visible. All right, let's take, I think, one more here. Liz B says, oh, how I've missed games that have playoff implications this late in the season. Whenever they do make the playoffs, the LCA is going to be, how the kids say, fire. The LCA has been rocking lately, man. Like, even against Tampa, where they could not beat this goalie, the LCA had a phenomenal atmosphere. Can you really trade Bertuzzi at this point? And since he's been out for a decent chunk of the season, do you think there's a chance he signs a 1-year deal with Detroit in the hopes that next season goes better for him that he can then cash in on?
It's possible.
I think both things that you suggested are possible. Yeah.
Yeah. If I'm Bertuzzi at his age and his circumstance, and his injury history, a 1-year deal is risky.
Yeah, that's a risky bet on yourself.
Yeah, especially at his age too. It's not like he's 23, right?
Yeah.
So if next season goes poorly for him, he may never get another big contract. Unlikely, but it's very risky in his particular circumstance. So he's also on a big enough heater now that if it's not the Red Wings, I think someone probably gives him at least a decent contract at this point. Just look at the demand around him at the trade deadline before the Red Wings pulled him off the market. So I'll say unlikely, but not crazy.
All right. That's all we have time for today. We have to see what happened with this Timo Meier trade. It's probably going to, you know what, the details are going to come out the moment we hit publish on this.
It's a 4-piece trade, and we are getting 1 piece every 4 hours.
For now, we're going to wrap up this episode. We are going to be back with you on Wednesday with our trade deadline primer for not just the Red Wings, but the rest of the NHL. We'd like to thank all of you for listening. All of you who are coming to Winged Wheel Podcast under the LCA, thank you so much. DetroitRedWings.com/WWP. Keep your eyes out there in case we can squeeze more tickets in. And patreon.com/Winged Wheel Podcast for all of you who are so inclined to support the show. Thank you. If you want to support the show in other ways, honestly, just tuning in means the world to us. Leave a rating wherever you listen. Make sure you hit subscribe, leave that rating. It really does help the show out. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, whatever. Subscribe wherever you're listening or watching. And yeah, just thanks for being here with us. We'd like to thank all of our name level supporters on Patreon. Arjun Shankar, Yves Bartels on behalf of the Sarah Grand Foundation, Aikfer, Bertuzzi's Missing Tooth, Nick Perks, Icon, Terry Driver for the number 69, Crying Ryan, Hannah's Banana Slam at Jamathon, Glenn Brabham, Aiden White, Keenan O'Donohue, Johnny Burgers, Meals on Wheels, Matthew M. Rice, Croner's Left Knee, Ariel Rojo, Babe Landeskog, Carl Brutana Nanalewski, Chimmy, Ariel, in case I haven't said it, thank you so much for becoming a name level sponsor. Chris P, Citizen High Five, Connor Scovey, Coyote Season Tickets in Tempe, Denny's Gamer Girl, Derek Enstam, Detroit Rob, who is a new name level sponsor, I believe, DJ Denton, Give Blood Fight Probert, Red Hot Ronik, Sam Al Qassem, Jake Gollum, Jacob Turner, Jake Wallman, looks like an athletic Ryan Hanna, thank you. Joel Miranda, Joseph Barry, Kalen Wood, Kevin James, King Tone, Las Ensaladas Picantes, Marcus, Massive Wong, Evan Longsaber, Matt McKay, Michael Edlin, Nedeljkovic, goalie number 1, Nicholas Fritz, R.A., Ryan Hubbard, Scott Martin, Send It Seawolf, That's What I Appreciates About You, General Andy Bohan of the Cheesebag Army, Sam Bankson, number 1 Detroit Red Guys fan, A.A. Ron, again, thank you for becoming a name level sponsor, Antonio Gracias, Ben Barron, noted Filip Zadina whisperer and proud member of the Jake Wallman Gritty Club, Brad Simmons, Brian Vasha, CJ Wilkinson, thank you for becoming a name level sponsor, CJ, Connor Leighton, Corey Preda, and thank you, Corey, for joining the Dub Club, Darren Fick, D. Cider, that's as much as I'll abbreviate, Philip Zadie's Nuts, George's Biggest Fan, Grand Rapids Hockey Guy, Griffey Boy, Heronic's Handlebar, James Laporte, Jeremiah Dobo, JM Rhapsody, John Evans, John Ingalls, Josh Yelchin, Kevin McCracken, Quaz, Lieutenant Matt S. of the Cheesebag Army, Linda Hull, Maximilian, Melissa Erickson, Ophelia, Reed, Steven, Tatar Sauce, The Hodag, the original Bertuzzi's Lost Tooth, and finally my favorite patron, Matt Keeler. Thank you all so much. Let's see where this trade deadline, next couple days, I should say, takes us.
Thanks for tuning in to the Winged Wheel Podcast. Be sure to check out wingedwheelpodcast.com, where you can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. You'll also find links to other ways to support the show, such as Patreon, official podcast apparel, and more. And don't forget to follow the show on Twitter at Winged Wheel Pod. And of course, the hosts at Brad Crisco, at Ryan Hanna WWP, and at Hockeytown Evan.